This week has been just, I don't know. It's been enraging between seeing the cretins come out and justify and rationalize the torture, and then seeing what went down last night in the House. Has gotten me pretty angry. I want to talk about this CRomnibus. Yeah. We can talk about the torture stuff a little bit later if we have time. I've certainly talked about it quite a bit over the past couple of days. But
that surprises me.
And yeah, exactly. And I think I'm a little bit even more, I should warn you, I'm a little bit more annoyed than normal because Indie Mike, who I think listeners of this program are familiar with, who is my friend's friend, and I'm friends with him. Although he's annoying me so much. Who pretends that it's always about, that he calls himself an independent and he gets all his information from Ann Coulter. He's just so upset about the hypocrisy of Elizabeth Warren and Nancy Pelosi to actually try and shut down the government when they were so outraged that the Republicans had tried to do it before. And I've tried to explain to him that this guy it's not even process over substance with him. This is politeness over process over substance. If you were going to make a process argument about this, you'd say, hey, we shouldn't be including in a budget bill some broad policy measures that need to be actually debated and are deserving of debate, as opposed to just being shoved in there by lobbyists at the last minute. And and look, there's problems with not just that aspect of it as well. I mean, but there's other bills. But we should just say, just to round this up, and then I will unleash you.
Unleash me, baby. Let me go.
Well,
I'm ready to kick some ass over this.
Last night, it was the vote was 219 to 206. 219 prevailing, with 162 Republicans voting yes, 57 Democrats voting yes, 67 Republicans voting no, 139 Democrats voting no. The no votes had been largely, at least, if not inspired by Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, but certainly promoted by Elizabeth Warren in the Senate. So have a crack at it before I run down all the specific details here.
Would you like me to have a crack at the whole thing, or the claim that this is hypocrisy of some sort?
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Well, I don't know Indie Mike. I got to be honest with you. I don't know who he is. Apparently, he's quite popular on the show, it seems. So he's sort of your independent conservative, calling himself independent guy he's your muse of sorts.
So sometimes.
Yes. I mean, as far as I can tell here, this isn't about Elizabeth Warren, and I think you sort of just said this in your own way, but it's not about Elizabeth Warren and Nancy Pelosi wanting to shut down the government. It's not about them being spoiled brats, which is really kind of what Republican governing, and I don't even like using that word because they haven't done that, has been for, the better part of the 21st century. It's about the fact that, as you just said, there are some serious measures in here, and you're going to bring them up, having to do with derivatives trading, having to do with campaign finance reform, and other important aspects of it too. It has to do with cutting funding for the EPA, although I guess that's a budget matter that you could just go with and vote for against your, because you have to. And this is just a game that people on the right play. Still throwing bones of sorts to their socially conservative base. I mean, they get some stuff from them, but in the end, just at this point in time, to look at where we are and that the entire, apparatus of the Republican Party essentially can unite, because the only people in the Republican Party who voted against this thing thought it didn't go far enough, that it wasn't actually a crappy enough bill. That the entire, basically, I think only 18 Republicans voted against it, so most of the Republican Party voted for this thing. And
67 Republicans voted against it. I think
I'm sorry.
Those votes were more of a function of how can you allow President Obama's imperial presidency to continue when he is issuing these dictatorial executive actions regarding immigration.
And that's what I can't stand. And just for any Republican to, with a straight face, bring up hypocrisy, right? Any Republican who sits there and looks.
Well, he's an independent.
Well, yeah, he's full of shit is what he is. Any Republican who can try to look you in the face or independent conservative who can say, oh my God, food stamps, it makes turns lazy people, they're like animals. It makes people lazy, so they just sit around and enjoy, and rock and roll off the government dole. But going to big banks and saying to them, we're going to remove a provision here that makes it so you can't use taxpayer money to basically go around trading derivatives, essentially saying, we'll back you up. Go ahead, make any trade you want, lose any money you want, we'll bail you out. So that doesn't make derivatives traders, that doesn't make them dependent upon government. Again, it's only people who need to eat who become dependent upon government, not people that rip it off constantly. And Obama's executive presidency, because we didn't get signing statements and executive actions from President Bush all the time, and we didn't get one-party government from Bush essentially ramming things through. And I mean, I'm so sick of all the ridiculousness. I, again, like you, have been critical whenever I feel it's necessary, and that's been quite often of President Obama, of Democrats, of many people. But this unbelievable game that they play on the right where they pretend that Obama's the reason people aren't getting along. Obama's the reason why it's come to this, where we have to do this with immigration instead of a party that refuses to govern, a party that's still obsessed with a health care bill that's based on the damn thing the Heritage Foundation came up with in the 1990s. I mean, there's just a point where it's like, will you guys just shut the fuck up and do something positive and try and be a part of the solution instead of just sitting around constantly bitching about everything? Okay, I had my say. You go ahead, Sam.
All right. Well, we're going to have to do some heavy editing on today's program. Now, Cliff. Okay, let's go through this.
I apologize for anybody who has to spend any extra time.
That's all right. It's I think it's your FCC license that is at the.
That's what I figured. You guys don't respect my FCC license. Do whatever you need to do.
So, all right. So let's get to that first point. Okay, the difference, and you mentioned it. There's $60 million cut from the EPA. There's another provision though that is in this bill that I'll talk about. I'll list off in a moment. That actually has to do with the Clean Water Act, and so you cut $60 million from the EPA. That inhibits its enforcement capacity. Of course, this is what Republicans do. They don't care. In fact, it's not a question of they don't care. They want these externalities by business to be borne by the rest of us, be borne by people with asthma, be borne by people with cancer, whoever it is, drinking poor or not being able to drink their drinking water. On the other side of the ledger, that is, we're going to throw in bills or amendments that actually deal with policy. You are inhibiting the Clean Water Act from being extended to smaller waterways, which basically end up being these sort of receptacles for all sorts of pesticides runoffs. And you're not protecting those waterways which feed in to the larger waterways from where we get our water. It also cuts almost $350 million, almost 3% of the IRS budget. And this is just stunning. First off, we know that every dollar cut from the IRS budget increases the deficit by $7. Now, I'm not a big deficit hawk. People know that. Bush and Chains knows that, who listens to this program. But it makes no sense. I mean, every dollar that you put into the IRS, you get $7 back in terms of enforcement procedures. And so in this instance, not only will the IRS not be able to deal with that whole 503c1 controversy, but you're also basically telling wealthy people, hey, guess what? You're going to have a moratorium on an IRS that's going to audit you for the next couple of years. So enjoy.
You might as well just rip them off and go for it. And that's the important thing here. And again, this is why I can't stand the hypocrisy charge. We knew that, as you know, as people know who know anything about healthcare, for example, if you treat people in a preventative manner, you're going to end up paying less than you would pay down the road, right? But of course, Republicans who supposedly care about the deficit would rather that we don't give people health care and that it ends up blowing up the deficit. It's sort of like, Republicans claim that they care about the deficit, but giving people the death penalty ends up costing God knows how much more money with appeals and court process and the rest. But of course, they're still for it. I mean, it's just like basically in every way they could possibly be for spending more money, they are, while claiming that they care about the deficit. And it's just amazing to me.
It's ironic that you said that about the Affordable Care Act, because they also cut payments to the Independent Payment Advisory Board, which is part of the Affordable Care Act, which basically keeps medical costs growth down. All right, but let's get back to, so we have this, the two big issues for the Democrats were, and I would say the first one is the biggest one, and the second one is sort of secondary. But the first one was, like you say, letting banks trade all sorts of derivatives under subsidiaries that are insured by the federal government. That's, I mean, we know what that involves. That's basically saying to these banks, we're going to subsidize your trading, because what we're by subsidizing it, we're doing this. We're basically saying to those parties that you trade with that we're backstopping you. So it is basically going to provide a safer bet for those people who trade derivatives with you. And it's going to do two things. One, it provides you that subsidy because you're going to get more money for those derivatives because they're safer. Right. And two, it's going to encourage you to take riskier bets because you know it's going to be backstopped. And
right.
so
it's always wonderful when somebody else is taking care of that for you.
Indeed. And then the second part was a 10 times increase. 10 times increase in the amount of money that can be given directly to national parties, either Democratic or Republican National Committee. Now, understand, the reason why the Republicans wanted to do this was because they are afraid of the outside groups and the billionaires that they've unleashed through attacking other aspects of campaign finance reform.
Right.
They, you know,
and also Mitch McConnell at this point is taking a look at what the map looks like in 2016 and is scared out of his mind because they've got to reelect like right-wing loons in states, you know, like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and places like that, New Hampshire, a lot of bluish states, blue-purple states. You know, they've got Mark Kirk up in Illinois. I mean, they're in for a world of hurt, most likely, in 2016 with presidential type turnout. So, you know, they want to do whatever. I mean, we don't have enough money in the system. Let's get more in there.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is you know, it just reinforces what I've been saying in terms of the establishment part of the Republican Party and the, I don't know, you want to call them the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. Basically, these are just two different companies in the same industry. And so right. Now you have, if a donor gave $32,500, I think it is the maximum that you can give to a national party this year, that same donor would now be able to give another approximately $290,000. If I have these numbers right.
So $32,000 clearly wasn't enough.
Right. So now you can give $300 and something like $20,000 or $25,000 a year because democracy is beautiful. So, so those are the two big issues that had basically rallied Democrats to vote against it. There's other aspects in this CRomnibus that are just horrible. You have drivers now. Employers are now allowed to make their drivers drive 82 hours a week, truck drivers. That raises it by, I think, about 17 hours. Is that it? I mean, can you imagine the addition?
After we've had some of these high-profile accidents?
Yes.
I mean, it's insane, right? I mean, what's his name who was on the comedian?
Right.
African-American comedian.
Tracy Morgan.
Tracy Morgan.
Thank you. I couldn't think of his. I mean, you know, that's a high-profile example, but we've weakened so many of those standards already.
Well, it's dangerous for people on the roads. It's dangerous for the truckers. It's also relentlessly exhausting for the truckers.
Sure, it's not good for anybody.
I mean, can you imagine?
Somebody's making money.
Someone says to you, and because this is not obviously mandated, but what trucking company is not going to take advantage of this? I mean, you're going to get pushed out of the business if you can't do that extra 17 hours a week. Contemplate that for a moment, folks. If someone added 17 hours to your work week. Stunning. And that one, I think, came from Susan Collins. We had Pell Grants for college students will be cut. And the money is going towards the loan servicing companies who have been shown to be incredibly corrupt at worst, just horrible partners in this, and a complete waste of money at best. And this was pushed by Tom Harkin as he was exiting. God knows why he was doing that. One can only imagine. There's going to be, you're allowing Blue Cross and Blue Shield to basically allowed account what they call quality improvements as a measure towards their mandatory health spending to maintain that 80-20% ratio on health insurance. There's a provision in there that was set bipartisan provision to eliminate backdoor searches on by the NSA that has been removed. I mentioned the EPA with the Clean Water Act. There's also, it attacks nutrition standards in schools. It cuts money for women with infants and children. I mean, this is just, and
that's what you do when you're pro-life.
And so then the Obama administration, I keep wanting to call him the Bush administration. The Obama administration is out there getting Jamie Dimon to make phone calls to Democratic congresspeople to pressure them to vote for this bill because it's got this provision in there that's going to enrich these bankers more because God knows they need the help.
Yes, if anyone has been hurt by recent years, it's bankers. And I think we need to all stop for a second to sort of maybe a moment of silence to try and sort of think positive thoughts about them and help them during these difficult times.
Indeed. I mean, it's the holidays.
I mean, there's just a point where it just gets like, it gets so disgusting. You're just sort of like, really? I mean, can you find more ways to throw every goodie you can imagine? You guys who claim that you're all about, that you're all about equality, fairness, freedom, you're against big government, whatever. But in the end, yes, this may be a form of deregulating, whatever, but in the end, it's what we're doing is we're giving them subsidies because that's what it turns into. I mean, what you're doing is you're saying to banks, do whatever you want. We'll be there to cover the bill. And we know how that worked out. We know how that's worked out many times, but we know particularly how that worked out in 2008. And it's like, really? After that, even at this point, I mean, how much can you guys give them without feeling any shame?
And look, we should be clear here. I mean, this has been, it is the case that 140 Democrats voted against this, but those 57 Democrats made it possible. The Obama administration, I don't know if it is the case that Steny Hoyer was out there whipping. My understanding was that there was some conflicting information in that regard. But let's be honest. I mean, the Democrats, Obama completely just sold the Democrats down the river. I mean, that's the reality of this. This is setting the tone for how this is going to go in the future. And one could argue, and I suppose there's arguments out there, and maybe Cliff, I will, if you want to argue the devil's advocate just for the sake of some type of balance on the program today.
I'd like this to be a more fair and balanced program. So let me tell you why you're wrong about everything, Sam.
Okay, please.
No, you're right. But the problem here is, as somebody who's involved, as you know, with the kind of the gun violence prevention community, I know there were some good people that wanted to vote for this because there was a lot more money put in for the NICS background check system, $73 million, in fact. And that's been a big problem for, with background checks that we even do, that some of these guys, the records fall through. And so I know there are people who genuinely were, are pushing for this, and we're doing it for the right reasons. To me, overall, clearly there's so much bad stuff in here that even as somebody who feels as strongly as I do about the issue of gun violence, there's no way I could vote for this if it were me, and I think it's a terrible bill. I'm just trying to say there are some people who are more focused, and as you know, a lot of people in the gun violence community or gun violence prevention community are there because they've lost somebody they love. And so I understand. I would never sort of tag everybody with, or paint everyone with that brush and say that, anybody supporting it is doing it for the wrong reasons. There are some people that I think legitimately see something good in this thing. But overall, you're right. I mean, it's terrible, and there's so many bad parts about it, and it's just a reminder of everything we've been through. It's sort of preemptively negotiating, giving in to people on the right, letting things show up in here that should never be in here, just to, I suppose, get along, because that seems to be that's the only thing that has ever been the most important thing to the Obama administration, is that they actually pass stuff, which is, if things are terrible, I'd rather you pass nothing, ever. It bothers me too because, one of the few things I think conservatives, get right, although I don't know they really follow up on what they say, but at least, which is, when people do something bad, if you do not punish them, if there's no consequences, they will do it again.
That's right.
Excuse me. And we basically just, watched Mitch McConnell, and John Boehner and others, right after President Obama was elected, get together, say, we're not going to let anything happen, tear the whole government down. And now, the minute they take over, you're giving in to them and letting them have something like this.
Right. And of course, let me just explain this to the dynamic to people. They haven't obviously taken over yet, but the idea would have been if we had just done a 3-month or a 6-month continuing resolution, and this came up again in February or in March, April, May, and there had to be another vote here, the budget would have been worse. But, I mean, now, with that said, that's possibly true. But one of the reasons why the Republicans wanted this so badly is that they also know that they have their own crew of lunatics that are coming in, and that they would not have been able to get the 162 votes that they got, and they wouldn't have been able to get those 57 votes from the Democrats because many of those Democrats in that 57 are going to be ones who are leaving because they got the blue dogs got voted out in favor of the rabid red meat right-wing Republicans.
And why'd they get voted out? Exactly for doing stuff like this.
Well, put that aside for a moment. That may or may not be the case, but the reality is that the Republicans needed to pass this, or at least the Republican leadership needed to pass this as much as the Democratic leadership. And here's the thing. That provision about Wall Street is not one that fed the beast. In other words, I don't really know, and my presumption is they don't really care. But it's not like those people who were upset and weren't going to vote for this because Obama's an imperial president and going on about the immigration thing. It's not like they could take this provision about Dodd-Frank and bring it back to their constituents and say, but at least we made it easier for banks to trade risky derivatives on your taxpayer backing. They're not going back. That's not so that dynamic was not in play. This was clearly one of those situations where that was all sort of a charade to get this in the bill and to ram it through. And so my point being that if the Republicans were faced with not passing anything and having to push a continuing resolution into the next year, that this provision could go. And if they wanted to avoid that, they wouldn't have lost any votes. And so the White House, by capitulating and actually lobbying and pushing Democrats, I think, really brought this about more than anything. I really do think that's the case.
They just don't, they literally don't seem to believe in leverage up there. They just seem to believe
Or they got exactly what they want. Or they got exactly what they want. In other words,
a deal for a deal's sake.
No, I'm not even saying that. That they were perfectly willing. Look, Jamie Dimon is not calling these members of Congress based upon some advice that he got from, the guy who shines his shoes in the bathroom at Chase Bank. No, he did this at the behest of the White House.
No, yes, that is clearly it too. I don't know that necessarily, for example, the White House would have wanted to cut funding from the EPA. Maybe I'm right about that. Maybe I'm wrong. I guess what I'm saying is I never find one explanation of Obama's actions to be sufficient. I find it's part of it is corporatism, and part of it is because if he gets a deal, he'd rather not fight, even if it's a deal, as long as it's a deal that makes people happy, he needs to be happy, and it goes through. It's not worth fighting over the EPA. It's not worth fighting over campaign finance reform. So, yeah, my guess is a few of the provisions that are in there, not my guess, I'm almost sure that he supports some of the bad ones. But some of the other ones, to him, are just not worth it. He won't stand on that hill and fight. Look,
you know what? The reality is you're not going to stop the Republicans from cutting the EPA. You're not going to stop them from cutting the IRS. You're not going to stop them from attacking, nibbling at the edges of the Affordable Care Act. You're not going to stop them from doing a lot of this stuff. But this banking thing, in particular, I mean, you're not going to stop them from getting, $325,000 from per donor for their net. There are some things that
you could get a lot more in return for some of that crap.
Well, perhaps. I mean, the argument with the bank derivative is that, well, we got more funding for the consumer for the CFTC, for the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, but you're basically giving them funding to regulate a less amount of regulations. In other words,
exactly.
okay,
it's like, here's some more money. Oh, by the way, you can't regulate this anymore.
Right. We've given more funds to the cops, but we've also made stealing and killing legal. So they're going to do a much better job of policing jaywalking. I mean, give me a break.